Hi students, we are starting into a new chapter, a new unit, a new section, a new basically biology life today as we approach evolution. And we can't talk about evolution without talking about the first person who proposed a legitimate mechanism for evolution to happen, and that is Darwin. It's important to say right from the beginning that Darwin did not come up with the idea of evolution. He figured out how it happens. He proposed the mechanism for how. And so in today's lesson and in tomorrow's lesson, we're going to be spending time understanding who Darwin was, the information that he obtained, and kind of following his story until he determines this mechanism called natural selection. So we need to start the story with what Darwin knew. Darwin's book is famously called The Origin of Species, and that's the book that he wrote to explain this mechanism of natural selection. But he wasn't the first person to think about these things. Previous to Darwin's era, a philosopher named Aristotle had described species on Earth and the Earth itself as fixed and unchanging. This idea that they came into being in the exact state that they were now, and they couldn't change, and they hadn't changed, and they wouldn't change, and everything was exactly fixed. And so these philosophers believed that they could then organize and catalog all of these organisms according to their increasing complexity. And so that idea is called the scala naturae. And this is an idea that we can categorize things from least complex to most complex. And so we might put something like a C. elegans or a Drosophila melanogaster as a less complex organism and put humans at the top of the list as the most complex organism. Time after time, as research has gone through, those kinds of ideas have been kind of tossed aside. We assumed that humans were going to have so many genes when we did the Human Genome Project, and they have much less than a plant. Humans are very unique, but so are all animals. And so the current view is a lot more understanding of the fact that each creature comes with its own unique features in order to classify it. And so the Linnaean system of classification, which was born from this hierarchy, is still continued to be used today, although the emphasis on one thing being more complex than the other maybe has been set aside. So over here, I have the classification of the domesticated dog. And so this is a picture of my dog. This is Buster over here, and my daughter Charlotte holding him because he wouldn't pose for a picture by himself. And so we're just going to talk really quickly about what the classification would be of an organism like this. So every organism on Earth, every plant, every animal, every fungus, every protist, every bacteria, every archaea is classified according to this kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, or King Philip came over for green spaghetti is one way you can remember it. So a dog would be in kingdom Animalia. They are not a plant, a fungus, a protist, or an archaean. So they would be or a prokaryote, so they would be an animal, Animalia. Their phylum is Chordata, and things that are in phylum Chordata have a notochord or a spinal cord, at least in some point during their development. There are some things called tunicates and lancelets that don't continue to keep a notochord as they get older. That's okay. But they have them during their development. You have to be able to see that structure to be in our phylum Chordata. Their class is Mammalia. Animals that are part of Mammalia have 3 bones in their inner ear that connect their tympanic membrane to a little window, which is where they pass the sound into their cochlea. Their order is Carnivoria. So members of this order have teeth that could eat meat. This is where we actually branch off. We are not part of the order Carnivoria. We are Kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia. That's us too, me and Buster. my dog. We are both in those things in common, but our order changes. Their order is Carnivoria. This is where they have teeth that eat meat. Their family is Canidae. So these are animals that look like dogs. The shape of their skull, their number of teeth, we would see that they were Canidae. This is different than bears. This is different than cats. But there are probably a wide range of animals that would fit into this family, both living, extant, and extinct animals that have gone extinct in time. Their genus is Canis, and so this includes wolves and foxes in this Canis genus. And then their species is Canis familiaris, the family dog, the familiar dog. These are the domesticated dogs. If you go into the dog park on 190th and you're walking in the gate, there will be a sign there that says Canis familiaris only, no hybrids. And what they're saying is that if you happened to own a wolf, you aren't allowed to bring it to the dog park. Only domesticated Canis familiaris are allowed in. And so we use this specific genus species combination in order to identify a particular organism. Humans diverged at this order Carnivoria. We are in the order Primata. Our family is Hominidae, leading to Homo, and then Homo sapiens would be our genus and species. We have in common with the dog Animalia, Chordata, Mammalia, and then instead of Carnivoria, we would be Primata. Instead of Canidae, we would be Hominidae, genus Canis, genus Homo, species Canis familiaris, species Homo sapien. So there are places where we're the same and there's places where we're different. And when we're talking about evolution, we are concentrating as much on the things that we have in common as the things that have diverged in order to understand how we are all related to one another. Before Darwin's time, fossils had been found, and fossils were probably the first kind of glaring reason why Aristotle's concept that species were fixed, never changing, always remaining the same, it was the first kind of wrench in that concept. Because if that's true, and this is the skeleton of the horse that we have now, and this is a skeleton of something that seems so similar to the horse, but is not extant, is not currently alive, we immediately need to identify, justify, explain this discrepancy. And so fossils were kind of a jumping off point where many scientists, which would have called themselves naturalists at the time, many naturalists had described this idea that organisms could change over time or evolve. That was not brand new to Darwin's way of thinking. That was a pretty popular belief at the time. However, no one knew how they would do it. How would a small little skeleton like this evolve over time into this kind of massive organism of the horse? How would it do that? And so, not that Darwin was setting out to describe that, he certainly wasn't. He was going on an adventure. But that is what he ended up describing is the how. Natural selection is the explanation of how we see organisms evolve. So it's time to meet Charles Darwin. And we often see pictures of Darwin looking like this. This is the old Darwin, right? This is the famous naturalist, scientist, philosopher. But this is the Darwin that we're meeting. Darwin had a chance to go on a worldwide cruise. This was not luxurious. This was on a shipping vessel. He was going to travel on the HMS Beagle. He was invited to go along as a naturalist, as a person that was going to just kind of go ashore and study the environment. And so he went. It was an escape from a kind of oppressive family situation. He wanted to get out. He wanted to go see the world on his own. It was this opportunity to go. And so he went. And he was not, when he left, particularly enlightened in terms of natural selection or wanting to change the paradigm with which we saw evolution. He was inspired to learn while he was on the ship. He grew and learned a lot. He read a lot of books that helped him to explain what he was observing as he saw. So he spent most of his time on shore, and this is his trip. So they started up here in Plymouth and they went all the way around South America, and then they came across here and they stopped in Australia. They went around the Horn of Africa, and then over to South America again, and then back again to Europe. So he saw the whole world. He saw so much of the world and so many species and so much diversity, so much more than most people had access to see in this time frame. And also, while he was traveling on these big ocean sailings here, he was reading and learning and cataloging and exploring the information that he had collected. This led to three really major observations about animals in general. Darwin noticed that species varied globally, that they varied locally, and he noticed that they varied over time. And so we're going to look at each one of these things and some of the examples that Darwin saw or some other examples that we can think about. Like I said, Darwin was also reading and learning from other influences while he was on this ship. And all of these things together, his observations, his learning, his reading, what other scientists had said, other explanations, all kind of converged. And he thought for a long time and discerned this theory for a really long time before he presented it. That's why he gets so much credit for evolution, is just because of how much he discerned, thought, and how many examples he could put forth to show how natural selection was working. So we're going to start out today and we're going to look at these three places that made him question the paradigm, that made him question this belief that things were fixed. And then tomorrow, we're going to spend some time and we're going to look at the influences. Who was he reading? Who were the books and the influences that helped him to finally come together and really try to understand that theory of natural selection and how it shapes evolution? So the first thing he saw is that organisms varied globally. If you go to Africa, to Australia, and to South America, you will find large flightless birds. They look very similar to one another. I mean, strikingly similar to one another. Like you think they have to be related to one another. But one lives in Africa, one lives in South America, and the other is in Australia. They're separated by these giant bodies of water and very few trips from place to place. So, are they three separate groups? Are they one group that has changed over time? Why wouldn't there be exactly an ostrich in all three places, or no flightless birds in South America and Australia, only an ostrich in Africa? Why this discrepancy where they're not the same, but they're very similar, and they lived in similar environments and they fed in similar ways? All of these things just made him question. He didn't understand. He wanted to understand, why did species vary globally? He also saw things like the Galapagos turtles. These turtles that are here are from different islands within the Galapagos Islands. And within these islands, there are as many variations on this tortoise as there are islands in the first place. Their shells can be dome shaped, or they can be saddle shaped, they can be bumpy, or they can be more smooth. They can have this kind of crest that comes out over the head, like this one, or they can be more withdrawn. Different islands had different turtles. Why? Why not the same one in the same places? Why would there be all these different tortoises for all of these different islands? Why wouldn't they be the same? Challenges the paradigm that things are fixed, that they're not changing. Because are they related? Or were all 12 or 10 different kinds of turtles once on all of the different islands and then the rest just died out? How did this happen? And the last one that he noticed was that species vary over time. And this one's so cool. A Galoptodon is a fossil that he found in South America. And it's not far off from where you find armadillos. So current armadillos, I don't know if you know what an armadillo is. It's a small kind of rodent sized, a little bigger like a possum kind of, but they're plated. They have this kind of like armory outside with these rings on their tail, and they're small though. I mean, they're like, small dog, large rodent size. He found fossils that look so much like an armadillo, except they were nearly human height. They were huge, giants. And Galoptodons are not alive anymore. They were only present in the fossil record. And so he has to ask, does the Galoptodon change into the armadillo over time? Are they an ancestor of the armadillo? Or were Galoptodons and armadillos alive at the same time, but the Galoptodons just died off and the armadillos stayed alive? Which one is it? How does this work? And so Darwin comes home with just a lot of questions, which is why he starts reading. He starts looking for answers in research and ideas that other people had. And he's going to end up borrowing ideas from Hutton and Lyell, from Lamarck, from Malthus, and from artificial selection, artificial breeders. He is going to take these ideas and compile them with the observations that he took into this mechanism for natural selection. And we're going to be looking at these influences and trying to understand how they helped him to learn. We're going to be looking at those tomorrow. Good job today, you guys. I'll see you tomorrow.